Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're doing something really exciting. We're tracing the fascinating history and the deep theological differences between the standard 66-book Western Bible you might be used to and the massive, ancient 81-book Ethiopian Orthodox Canon. We're going to see exactly what our source material reveals about these ancient texts and the incredible civilization that kept them safe. Let's jump right in with a pretty massive question posed directly by our source. What exactly happened to the 15 missing books of the Bible? Our source argues that these texts didn't just disappear, they were systematically excluded from Western scripture over centuries. Yet, somehow, they survived. They were miraculously preserved in cliffside monasteries over in Africa. To understand how and why that happened, we've got to go back in time. Section 1. The Kingdom of Axum, an ancient superpower. To really grasp what the West left out, we first have to look at the civilization that actually protected these texts. See, the early African Christian tradition developed completely independently from Rome. It started way back with the baptism of the Ethiopian eunuch in the 1st century, and then King Ezna officially made Christianity the state religion around 330 AD. The source points out that this total independence led to the creation of the Grima Gospels. Radiocarbon dating confirms these were made between 330 and 650 AD, making them literally the oldest surviving illustrated Christian manuscripts on Earth. And the source really emphasizes that Axum wasn't just some small settlement. It was an ancient superpower that easily rivaled Rome, Persia, and China. We've got the tangible artifacts to prove it. We're talking towering 80-foot carved granite stelae, some of the absolute earliest Christian gold coins ever minted, an entirely unique written script called Gaze, and later on, those staggering rock-hewn churches in Lalibela. This was a highly advanced civilization, deeply capable of preserving massive, complex sacred traditions entirely on their own. Section 2. The 81-book Ethiopian Canon. All right, the absolute crucial number you need to remember here is 81. That represents the total number of books actively read and revered in the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo churches, and they've been using them for roughly 2 millennia. That is 15 more books than you're going to find in the standard Bibles sitting on bookshelves in the West today. While the standard Western canon got locked in at 66 books, the Ethiopian canon boldly held on to major additions. We're talking about texts like 4 Baruch and the Epistle of the Apostles, which actually contains purported post-resurrection dialogues with Jesus. The source makes a really key point here. These 15 extra books were completely untouched by the sweeping theological edits and flat-out removals that Western empires enforced. Section 3. Enoch and Lost Cosmology. Okay, let's dive into the most famous of these excluded texts. The source argues that early church fathers, guys like Tertullian and Irenaeus, actually viewed the Book of Enoch as highly authoritative. I mean, get this. The standard New Testament book of Jude literally quotes Enoch directly as divine prophecy. It says, "See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone." It's right there. Yet it still got stripped from the Western Bible. So, why? Well, look at the incredibly intricate narrative Enoch gives us. Enoch details how 200 fallen angels, known as the Watchers, corrupted humanity. And they didn't just breed Nephilim giants, they introduced some seriously dangerous, forbidden knowledge. The Watcher Azazel taught humans metalwork and how to make swords and armor. Others taught sorcery, astrology, and even the art of cosmetics. It's a wildly more complex origin story for human corruption than the quick summary we get in standard Genesis. Our source proposes a really fascinating theory for why Enoch got the boot. It just didn't fit the political agenda of the Roman Church. Enoch features this incredibly complex cosmology, where individuals have direct divine encounters, like Enoch, literally being taken straight up to heaven by God. The source suggests Roman bishops ultimately removed it because a theology where everyday people interact directly with angels totally undermined the centralized, priest-mediated authority that the imperial church wanted to establish. Section 4. Jubilees and Sacred Time. Another massive exclusion from the West is the Book of Jubilees, sometimes called Little Genesis. This text restructures biblical history into precise 49-year periods and outlines a 364-day solar calendar. Now, obviously, that profoundly contrasts with the 365-day Gregorian calendar that the West uses. Because Ethiopian Christians held on to Jubilees, this ancient sacred timekeeping fundamentally shapes their unique liturgical dates even today. For example, Genna, which is their Christmas, is celebrated on January 7th. Section 5. Rome, Power and Exclusion. It really all circles back to this core question. Why on earth did Western Christianity actively remove 15 deeply revered books from its official scripture? Our source posits a very specific historical argument here. They suggest that the removal was driven heavily by political consolidation and imperial control, rather than just pure theology. Here's how it went down. Emperor Constantine wanted a politically unified empire in 325 AD, and that kicked off a whole sequence of Roman councils designed to systematically codify the Western canon. By the time the councils of Hippo and Carthage wrapped up around 397 AD, the approved reading lists were locked in, and they explicitly left out the texts that were so treasured by the Ethiopian church. A glaring example of this historical shift is the Shepherd of Hermas. This was a text packed full of moral parables and grassroots commandments, and it was actually included as official scripture in the 4th century Codex Sinaiticus, which is one of the oldest complete Bibles we even have, but later totally discarded by Western authorities. Our source argues that tossing texts like Hermas allowed the early Roman Church to consolidate power, pulling authority away from localized personal morality and placing it firmly into the hands of an elite, centralized church hierarchy. So you're probably wondering, how did Ethiopia manage to protect its texts from all of this? Basically, geography and sheer defiance. Ethiopia completely bypassed Western events like the Crusades and the Inquisition. They relied on extreme geographic isolation, hiding out in these incredible cliffside monasteries. Crucially, they flat-out rejected Roman edicts like the Council of Chalcedon in 451 AD. Plus, they continuously read and wrote in their own Ge'ez language, which essentially created an impenetrable fortress for their 81-book canon. Section 6. The Kebra Nagast Legacy. So how do all these unbroken, ancient traditions shape Ethiopia's defining national narrative today? It centers on the Kebra Nagast, which translates to the glory of kings. According to our source, this is a 700-year-old national epic that expands significantly on the biblical story of the Queen of Sheba. It explicitly identifies her as Queen Makeda, a powerful African ruler. Her union with King Solomon anchors the foundational identity of Ethiopia's Solomonic dynasty, a lineage that ruled continuously for nearly 3,000 years. Now, what's truly captivating is what happens next in this epic. Their son, Menelik, travels to Jerusalem. The Kebra Nagast tells us that Solomon actually offers Menelik the throne of Israel, but he chooses to return home to Africa instead. And when he does, he brings the absolute most sacred object in all of Israelite worship back with him, the Ark of the Covenant. And today, this isn't just viewed as some ancient myth, it is a living, breathing theological practice. The source notes that the original Ark is purportedly still guarded by a single monk in a chapel in Aksum. Meanwhile, exact replicas called tabots remain the physical and theological center of the Holy of Holies in every single Ethiopian Orthodox church. It's a foundational practice completely distinct from standard Western church traditions. Let's zoom out for a second and look at the broader impact of this Aksumite canon. By keeping these texts safe from colonial and imperial erasure, the Ethiopian tradition preserves an entirely distinct African-centered lens on the very origins of the Judeo-Christian faith. They've retained unique church laws in texts like the Synodos, and they've safeguarded an entire theological perspective that was otherwise completely lost to Western history. I want to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. If the world's oldest continuous Christian tradition was built upon these 81 books, how does reading them fundamentally reshape our modern understanding of history and theology? As these ancient, once-hidden texts become more and more globally accessible, how is the incredible survival of the Aksumite canon going to challenge everything you thought you knew? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking those big questions.